Hey guys, so I meant to talk about this sooner, but I just haven't gotten a chance to. But we are seeing a huge normalization push for widespread aerial spraying to geoengineer the planet. They're just straight up telling us now that this is what's going to happen, and that's just the way it is. They're not asking everyone. They're not taking a survey. How do you feel about being a guinea pig in a planetary geoengineering project? They're not doing that. They're just straight up telling you now that we are living through a test. And that is just how it is. This article appeared in the New York Times about a month ago. Is it okay to tinker with the environment to fight climate change? But see, actually, it's one of those rhetorical questions that they already know the answer to because they are already tinkering with the environment and they're going to continue to do so. So it's really not the question of what you think. It's the question they ask, and then they go ahead and answer it with an affirmative, and then they try to tell you why you should just accept it. In this particular very long, thousands of words article, it's discussing Harvard professor David Keith, who's been sketching his vision. And you just won't believe what it is, guys. It's 10 Gulfstream jets outfitted with special engines that allow them to fly safely around the stratosphere at an altitude of 70,000 feet, take off from a runway near the equator, and their cargo includes thousands of pounds of a chemical compound. Liquid sulfur, let's suppose. Oh, goody, yes, let's. That could be sprayed as a gas from the aircraft. It's not a one-time event. The flights take place throughout the year, dispersing a load that amounts to 25,000 tons. If things go right, and I would say keyword if, the gas converts to an aerosol of particles that remain aloft and scatter sunlight for 2 years to pay off a slowing of the Earth's warming for as long as the Gulfstream flights continue. Oh, great. Exactly the kind of stuff we've been talking about for years and called all kinds of names every time you mention it. So there's a mini rainbow on each side of the sun, equidistant from each other. And then there's this upside down rainbow directly above my head. I've just not seen that before. I don't think there's a single natural cloud in the sky right now. What a conspiracy theorist you are because you think chemtrails are real. You're crazy. Well, now they're going to actually just do that, okay? They're going to do that, and that's just how it is. He's upset because people said that he's like a Dr. Strangelove figure. Gee, I can't imagine why they would make that comparison. Anyway, it goes on to talk about how he's got a broad endeavor that's going to begin with 7 million. It's going to go to 20 million. Their backers are the normal eugenics organizations like Bill Gates. I mean, it's all the same stuff, basically. And oh, by the way, they're planning to conduct a field experiment early next year by putting particles into the stratosphere over Tucson. So if you live in Tucson, Arizona, you're now officially a guinea pig of Harvard and the government and whoever else is funding this research, including Bill Gates and the Hewlett Foundation. So just know all about that. They're not going to come ask you what you think if you live in Tucson. They're not going to send one of those little cards to your house where you can check a box. Do you want to be a guinea pig for geoengineering? We're going to spray your atmosphere. They're not going to do that, okay? They're just letting you know that if you live in Tucson, heads up, literally. And it just goes on and on and on. It's a very long piece of propaganda where they're basically making the argument that this is awesome. See, look at this awesome artwork. It's just so great. It's like little flowers in the sky. But they do, even in this article, admit that there are risks, undeniably, some small, others potentially large and terrifying. Oh, good. I'm so glad. And that they could screw with biodiversity permanently, that they could deplete the ozone. Just all kinds of stuff. And then they go on to admit, down here towards the last part of this thing, that Keith is not trained as an atmospheric scientist. Oh, goody! I'm so glad that we're going to have a planetary geoengineering project where they're spraying tens of thousands of tons of particulates into the air that could cause terrible catastrophic effects. And the guy who's manning the helm on that is not even trained as an atmospheric scientist. What? It just... When they get all the way down here and they say, the fact is, we are living through a test already. So there you go. That's what it is. You're living in a test already, so just basically need to deal with it. And to that, I just want to add that we've been living in a test for decades and decades and decades and decades, and legally, in a court of law, precedent has been set that it is okay for the government to use us as guinea pigs. That's it. It's already happened. This came out in the 70s, along with all the other stuff that came out in the 70s, that the Army had conducted 239 different biological warfare experiments in the United States over several decades without any telling anyone. No informed consent whatsoever. Supposedly these were harmless simulants, the bacteria that were used, but people died, okay? And one of the cases of this is an article, How the U.S. Government Tested Biological Warfare in America, and it documents this. Fort Detrick sent a task force to unleash bacteria on San Francisco.
These aerosols could be spread over large areas. Submarines could release aerosols near coastal cities.
And they carried out 6 different experimental warfare attacks with 2 different kinds of bacteria. The Army blasted the chemicals in 30-minute spurts, producing huge clouds that were up to 2 miles in length. And then they would go to different collection points throughout the city and collect data and assess, how far these things spread. And this one guy had been recovering from a prostate gland surgery, and he wound up back in the hospital with a bacterial urinary tract infection that contained this bacteria that the Army biological warfare researchers had sprayed all over San Francisco. And he died. It went to his heart and it killed him. Then 10 more patients over the next 6 months came to this hospital infected with this bacteria, and they all recovered after long, painful hospital stays. But the point at the time was, this was unprecedented. There was no medical literature about people being infected with this bacteria. And so because it was so completely rare, it had never happened, a team of researchers ended up publishing an article about this incident in the American Medical Association's journal Archives of Internal Medicine. And when that happened, then you had the Fort Detrick people going, uh-oh, that was probably our bad. And they investigated it, and they concluded that it was probably their fault that that guy died. It was a secret 4-person investigation that was ordered to look into it. And they admitted at that time that that particular bacteria was actually not an ideal simulant, and they mused over the likelihood that it killed that guy. But despite all of that, they went ahead and justified the continued use of the stuff, saying that on the basis of their study, they conclude that it's so rarely the cause of illness, and that the illness resulting is predominantly so trivial that its use as a simulant should be continued even on populated areas, even after it hospitalized 10 people and killed someone. Okay? And throughout the report, the investigators showed little remorse for the infected civilians because they don't care. Okay? It's not about you. Everyone just becomes data points to these people. They're not people anymore. And what ended up happening was the grandson of this guy who was killed sued the government. He was a lawyer, and he dug into the case, and he sued the government over it. See, here's the report right here from the Army, and here's the hearings from the subcommittee. And he sued him, but he lost because it's the government. And during the trial, General William Creasy, the commander of the United States Biological Warfare Unit, got on the stand and said he would find it completely impossible to conduct such a test trying to obtain informed consent. If they tried to tell people it was non-pathogenic particles, 99% of people wouldn't know what pathogenic meant. So because of that, they just couldn't get informed consent, so they just did it anyways. And they continued to do it, and they continued to do it with bacteria they knew was killing people. Okay? This guy lost because it was the government. He was up against the government. He lost. It's a government system, and he's suing the government. He lost. And this is the point that I wanted to make. The judge in the case concluded the Army had been entitled to spray the population without consent under the discretionary function exception in the Federal Tort Claims Act. So this guy went ahead and tried to do Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court, and he still lost. So they ruled that they had the right to do this. And there were other things too. This goes on to document how in 1955, in an experiment, the CIA sprayed whooping cough over Tampa Bay, Florida. 12 people died. but there was no hard evidence, right? Another infamous test in 1966 involved federal agents crushing light bulbs containing trillions of bacteria on the New York subway. And a whole lot of people got sick from that. They do stuff on the New York subway all the time. They sprayed aerosolized LSD in there, all kinds of stuff they do in the New York subway. They just look they look at the New York subway like they're a petri dish, basically. But actually that's how they look at the whole country, really. But why did I bring this up? I brought this up and I pointed this out because I just wanted to say that this right here is not them asking if it's okay to tinker with the environment to fight climate change. This is them admitting now that this is what they're going to do and announcing that right now they're going to do it in Tucson, but basically this is the plan. And they're saying at the end of the article that we live in a test already. We're all experimental subjects. All the people. Think about all the times you've been called a conspiracy theorist when you say, look up at the sky. Doesn't this look weird? Doesn't this look unnatural? I took this picture in 2011. I think it was in December. It was in Jefferson City. It was a grid. It was a perfect grid over the city. But that's just atmospheric conditions, right? The fact is we are living through a test already. And now they just want to let you know.